Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in to today's live session. I'm Effie and today we have Chrislyn here to share her experience. So before we start, I would like to tell you a bit about the Welfare Task Force. So the Welfare Task Force for Malaysian Students Abroad is a student-led organization which primarily focus on students' welfare, especially during this pandemic. We also provide information and contact details regarding the COVID situation and also for traveling. We also have a buddy system for students who feel isolated or would like to get to know a few friends. So for more information, feel free to follow our social media. Well, today, Chrislyn here is sharing her experience of returning to Malaysia from the UK and also how she got tested positive for COVID-19. So hi, Chrislyn, thanks again for joining us today. Can you please introduce yourself?
Thanks for having me. So my name is Chrislyn. I'm a current fourth year law student at the University of Warwick. I'm from Malaysia. Yeah, that's all.
Right. Would you like to briefly tell us how was your lockdown experience and when did you travel back home to Malaysia?
Right. So I will go chronologically so that it makes sense probably for people. So I went on Easter break. So my school broke for Easter sometime in, I think I want to say early March or mid-March. And I was actually in London with a friend because, holiday and COVID, I think wasn't really, nobody was really making such a big deal of COVID then. So while I was in London with my friend, the UK entered into its lockdown. So essentially I was stuck in London with her for 2 weeks. And I think the first week it was kind of strange because I was only planning to stay there for like maybe 2 or 3 days to just, like for a break. And I ended up staying with her in her house for 2 weeks. And it got to a point where it was kind of like, I can't keep freeloading off this person's generosity. And it's kind of weird. Like I was sleeping in her room and it's like, okay, we have no personal space. And, her family wouldn't let me pay for groceries. So it was a bit like freeloading and I was quite uncomfortable with that. So I made a quite difficult decision to like go back to campus, even though I knew I'd be alone for the unforeseeable future. And I knew it was kind of dangerous to be traveling, but I felt like I was left with very limited options because I wasn't prepared to stay in London for that long. I didn't have that many things, like exams were coming, I didn't have my books, like it was a whole situation. So I traveled back to Coventry from London. And it was kind of strange because London was an absolute ghost town during the lockdown, which was good because no one should have been going out anyways. But so after those 2 weeks in London, I was in Coventry for about 3 weeks in isolation. So I lived in student accommodation and all my flatmates had gone home. So for 3 weeks, I didn't speak to like not one living soul except, the Tesco cashier. And even then I tried not to speak to the Tesco cashier and use self-checkout because it's safer. So it was a very lonely experience. And I think especially when you are an international student abroad, it is really good to have community around you. And I think it is very different when the only time you can speak to your friends or family is online.
Yeah.
So I did that for about 3 weeks and it was coming close to exam season. And I was just like looking at flights on MAS out of curiosity. And I saw that the last commercial flight out of the UK was on the 29th of April. And after that, they were stopping all flights for June. So I had to make for May and June. So I had to make quite a difficult decision because my final exams would have ended early May. And if I didn't fly back home, I would basically be alone for, I don't know how long. And, my rent ends in June. And I was like, it's kind of sad. I already don't have like graduation because of this whole pandemic. And I was thinking, I don't know how feasible it is for me to stay alone for an undefined period of time. And this kind of was my last chance to go home. So I made a really, I guess, quick decision because the flight was leaving in a few days. I was like, okay, it's either I get on this flight or you stay alone for, I don't know how long, until the UK lifts its borders or something like that. So I decided to get on that flight. So I took a cab from Coventry to London Heathrow. And when I got to Heathrow, they had delayed my flight by 1 day. So, you know, there were like a few of us in the airport and they just told us on the spot, like, yeah, sorry, like your flight's being delayed until tomorrow. So we were like, we can't stay in the airport because nothing was open. So there's not even like Boots open or anything like that. So in terms of food or, you know, just like, even if you wanted to wait it out, you couldn't really because there's no food. And then, you know, London Heathrow, I'm not sure if everyone's familiar, but if you know London Heathrow, you know that it's kind of really isolated. So it's not like it's near anywhere that you can just at least get a drink or something like that. So MAS, I suppose, was kind enough to give us rooms at a hotel, but I don't know whether it was lack of budget or something. A lot of us had to share rooms. And I guess given the current situation, that's not very smart or safe in a healthcare perspective. So because you're just sharing rooms with like random people that you don't know. And I think this is like the crux of my point. It's that you can be as careful as possible. You can follow all the relevant SOPs. You just need one person to not follow it. And I think that's what is the scariest part and the most dangerous part about this virus, is that you really need to have a communal attitude towards this whole thing. So, I mean, let me make it clear that the girl I was staying with was lovely. She was so nice. But, you know, like, I feel transmission could have happened anywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, especially given the fact that, okay, we don't even get our own room. So, I mean, I'm not saying that she passed it to me or anything, but you don't know, somebody could have passed it to her. I could have passed it to her. You know, I could have been positive at that time. We don't know these things. So, so we stayed there for one night in London, and then we took off the next day. So I arrived in KL on the 30th morning. No, or the morning of the 1st of May.
Right. It was, wow, very, very tough experience for you. Like, I understand, you know, like making a tough decision to whether travel back to Malaysia or not. And then like what you said about the airport experience, wow, it just, wow, it's really a tough experience for you. Wow.
Yeah, it's been a journey.
Yeah. So, and of course, we know that you got tested positive for the coronavirus. So would you mind sharing with us, like, how was the experience like?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's helpful and possibly educational to everyone to know what it's like. So I'll split my answers kind of broadly into 3 categories. So like the actual procedurally how it is, physically how it was for me personally, and like emotionally / mentally. Procedurally, if you are traveling to Kuala Lumpur, or I guess anywhere in Malaysia, I cannot speak for like traveling out of Malaysia to another country. You're traveling to Kuala Lumpur, you get tested at KLIA. KLIA looks very different now. For those who have come back, you'll know what I mean. For those who have yet to come back, you're gonna be very weirded out. It's very quiet. It is like a ghost town. There's very little flights in one day. So you get tested there. The whole process from the minute you land to the moment you leave probably takes in and around 6 hours. So I landed at 6 a.m. in the morning. I left KLIA at about 12 in the afternoon. And I think the best advice I can give people is just be patient. Like, everyone's doing their best to move people as fast as possible. They section you into groups, so you don't all get tested at the same time. I think it's just to social distance and limit the load on the healthcare workers. So your results will come back in about ±3 days. So mine came back in about 3 days. I was at the quarantine center at the time. Once Kementerian Kesihatan Malaysia, or like Ministry of Health, called me, I basically was immediately relocated to Hospital Sungai Buloh. I don't know whether that's the only, I'm pretty sure that's not the only hospital. I think they have multiple hospitals, and again, it depends where you get quarantined. So I got moved to Hospital Sungai Buloh. And for about 2 days, I was observed in the main building. So they like put you under observation for a few days just to see if you develop any worse symptoms. If not, they will move you to another building where you're placed in a ward with about 16 people, I want to say. It's quite a lot of people, but I think obviously everyone in that ward is either asymptomatic or basically has no symptoms, and they're just kind of waiting for their second test, which is taken on the 13th day of your quarantine. And they count that from the moment you touch down, so not the moment you enter the hospital. So I think that's kind of the procedural side of things. I got moved out of the main hospital building in like 2 days because I wasn't actually displaying any symptoms. Yeah, I got moved to the kind of non-serious ward. And on the 13th day of my quarantine, I got another COVID test and I tested negative. So basically after you test negative, you can leave. However, you can take a Grab if you're comfortable with that, or you can, I guess, call someone to get you. So in terms of the physical aspect of testing positive, like I mentioned earlier, I actually didn't really display any symptoms. So it was kind of a shock for me when they called me and told me that I tested positive. Yeah, I honestly felt fine. Nothing was really wrong. There was one day that I completely lost my sense of taste and smell, which I know now is actually a symptom. And it was really weird. I was eating breakfast and then I realized I couldn't taste anything. So then I took perfume and I sprayed it and I tried to sniff it just to see if like I could smell it, and I actually could not smell it.
Like nothing at all.
Nothing. It was really, really, really weird because you can't even tell if you smell bad or nothing. And then your food tastes really horrible because you can't taste it. So that was, when that happened, I was like, wait a minute, what's going on? Like, I know this is like a symptom, right? That's weird. So I explained my symptoms to my brother, who's like a med student. So he was like, okay, don't panic. Because I have sinus issues. So they're like, it could be, you know, sinusitis or something like that. You know, don't panic. Like, let's just see what happens. And literally within the next 24 hours, that was gone. After that, I was fine. I could smell and taste everything again. So I just assumed maybe it was like my nose playing up, like dust that I'm not used to in the hotel or something like that. Yeah, but I literally had no other symptoms. So I suppose it's quite strange going to the hospital when you're not actually like sick.
But yeah, like, I'm really glad that you got tested negative in just like within 13 days. That's very good, very fast as well.
Yes, yeah, definitely. I think definitely in terms of the physical effects, I was mostly tired, but not really because of, I don't think it was because of the virus. I think it was just because of all the movement. Because imagine like you think, okay, I'm braving this 13-hour flight back to KL. I have to wear a mask the whole time. I'm not going to pee even once because I don't want to use the public toilets. And you think like you're getting in that mood for like, I'm going to be by myself for 2 weeks, but it's fine because after that 2 weeks I can go home. And then like that completely changes because, you know, after 3 days I get moved, and then after 2 days I get moved again, and no one really tells you what's going on. They kind of just tell you like, okay, follow me, and then suddenly you have to like take all your stuff, follow them. And I don't think it's not because they don't want to keep you informed, but rather they have so many things on their mind that they're just trying to move people as fast as possible to make it as efficient as possible. But most of the time I felt like I was in the dark because like the doctor would just come in and be like, okay, are you moving? And I was like, moving where? And they're like, we're moving you to another ward. And then you're just like, oh, okay.
Just move.
Sure. Yeah, and then I'm very bad at packing my stuff, so I have to like pack everything. I'm pretty sure I left so many things at like the hotel I was staying at. Like I left my toothbrush charger, all my shampoo, you know, all that kind of stuff, because I'm not used to being in such a fluster with all these things. So I suppose that's more emotional / mental rather than physical, but the physical effect was definitely that you just feel tired all the time because there's a lot of uncertainty. Which I suppose brings me to like my final point of like, what is the emotional toll of having the virus? I suppose for people who are relatively healthy and if they do contract it, things like that, I'm guessing, but again, I speak from personal experience, that the main thing you'll feel is just like stress. Because I think for me, the first thing that I thought of when the woman called me and she was like, yo, you tested positive. Okay, she didn't say yo, but she was like, yeah, you tested positive. And I was like, but I have exams in 3 days. So, you know, it was really harrowing because I was going to sit my first paper in 3 days. And I already thought this is such an unideal situation that I'm doing it in a hotel with slow Wi-Fi and things like that, but you don't have a choice, right? And then now I was like, oh my God, I can't do my exams. I should have felt happy, but I was just stressed about it. So the hospitals have no Wi-Fi. So you can't even even if you felt fine and you wanted to do your exams, you can't even do that. So I had to email my university from my phone and be like, hi, this is really random, but you know, I've got coronavirus. So I have no Wi-Fi. I'm messaging you from my phone. Like, what can I do? My university was quite kind. They let me defer my exams completely, which was really useful, but I also suppose necessary. And I think more so than that, it was stress because I was thinking, oh my God, what if Malaysia had no system of quarantine and I went back home to my family? Because my parents are quite old, so they would be in a high risk category, and I live with my grandmother. So I would have come home and infected everyone. And sure, I'm fine. And I think my body fought off the virus like fairly well. But what if my parents or my grandparents couldn't? So I suppose it is a blessing that, yes, Malaysia has the system in place where we have quarantine centers and everyone has to do mandatory quarantine, which is why I'm so pissed off at all these people who are flouting quarantine rules for home. But, you know, you just don't know. Just because you're not displaying symptoms doesn't mean you're not carrying it. So if I went back home to my family, I would have infected everyone. And I think it was the stress of that possibility that I was like, oh my God, wow, that's crazy. And I think finally, it's the conditions of the hospital that can be quite stressful, not because government hospitals are bad or anything like that. In fact, I would say the conditions were fairly, it was clean. They give you food. There's aircon, you know, which is a plus. It's so hot in Malaysia. But it's more the movement. You never actually get to rest. So they take your vitals maybe 4 times a day, and they do it at quite random times. So you could be getting ready to sleep, and then they come in and they turn on all the lights, and then they take your blood pressure and your ECG and things like that. And there's constantly movement in the hospital. So, you know, it could be 3 a.m. and nurses and whatever are running around because they have nurse and doctor things to do. And yeah, so I think it's more that kind of stuff that is quite stressful on your body, especially if you're someone who's very used to routine, like me. Suddenly everything gets thrown out of whack. You don't really have a proper sleeping schedule. Your meals come when they come. If you miss it, sorry, you don't get hot food, that's your problem kind of thing. They don't really provide water, but you can always buy water. And it's just minor things like that, which could really mess up your routine and make you a bit stressed.
Yeah, like you said, you're stressed, right? But did you feel scared, really scared about what happens if I get serious, you know, my condition?
Yeah, I suppose that's a very good question. I think when she first told me, I was like, you messed up my test results because I feel fine. And then obviously there's this fear that oh my gosh, what if this is the beginning and then I slowly progress and become worse and I die or something like that. But I think what's good to note is that when you're in the hospital, they are keeping such a close eye on you. That's why they check your vitals so many times. If the slightest thing goes wrong, you're already there, which is why I think in a way it's such a blessing to catch it and be at home, because the minute you have it, whether you have symptoms or not, you're taken to the hospital and they monitor you. Whereas I know in the UK, for instance, if you test positive but you're not needing a ventilator, they basically just tell you to stay at home and sleep it off or whatever.
So at least when you're in Malaysia, your family is close to you as well, right?
Exactly. And you're in the hospital already, so really if anything were to happen, you're there. There's no question of I need to get to the hospital, or does the hospital have enough beds? You're already there. And I suppose there were a few times where oh, oh, I coughed once. Oh my God, like the virus is taking me. It's, you know, but I mean, it could also be like the aircon is too cold and then you didn't drink water, you know. Like,
Yeah.
well,
And also we have a question from a student who asked like, do you have any tips for someone who were like unfortunately got tested positive for coronavirus?
yeah, I mean, I would say my advice kind of depends like where you are.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in Malaysia, I would say you are in very good hands. Like I honestly think the Ministry of Health is handling this excellently. Yeah, I think often I felt like I didn't know what was going on, but I knew someone knew what was going on. So even though I was kind of being moved here and there and like they don't really tell you what's going on, they are handling it. And they will only move you if you're not serious, kind of things like that. So if you are in Malaysia, rest assured you're being taken care of. They know what they're doing. I think our numbers sort of speak for them. Well, not recently, but generally the numbers sort of speak for themselves, that things are, the situation is being controlled. If you're not in Malaysia and you're not a citizen of whatever country you're currently in, I think the sentiment of staying calm remains. Like, obviously, I know that's easier said than done.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's going to make you well again. But especially if you're not displaying any severe symptoms, I really think that the best thing you can do at that current point is just rest. Please keep in contact with family virtually and friends virtually as much as you can, because I think it can be so lonely during that time, especially if you're not at home. And I suppose that's just like general advice, right? Like sometimes the situation is so bad, but you just have to stay calm. What else can you really do? So rest assured that everyone is, all the healthcare systems, like everyone within that system is trying their very best to rehabilitate everyone who's afflicted with this virus. So if that's you, trust that people are trying to help you. So you're not alone in this situation.
And also someone asked, like, did you get any treatments in the hospital aside from getting checked, like you're checking your vitals? Or did you just naturally get tested negative?
Okay, this is like a really funny story. And it's just
do tell.
Basically, there were a few people in my quarantine center that tested positive, so 3 of us to be exact, and 2 of us who were girls got put in the same ward. And we both weren't displaying any symptoms, but I think for her, she was a little bit more serious than me in the sense that she was displaying some mild signs of kind of like bronchitis when they did the scan for her. So one day, the nurse came in and she gave us this like neon yellow pill. And I think I should note here that my Malay is pretty terrible. So I didn't really understand what she said. I assumed that she gave it and we were all each supposed to take one. So the pill, if you know, it's 𝗬𝗓, which is the malaria drug. And so we both like, oh yeah, cool, we get medicines now. So we took the pill. And then like later when she was like, oh, did you take, to my friend, she was like, did you take both pills? And then we were like, no, I took one. And she was like, they were both for her. You don't need any drugs. I was like, oh, wait, like, can I take it? Will I be fine? Or will something happen to me? Like, maybe. So in essence, if you aren't displaying any symptoms or you're asymptomatic, you don't actually get any medicine because, again, no one actually knows, even 𝗬𝗓, they don't actually know the efficacy. So the hospital is in its way kind of trialing drugs on people on WHO's recommendation, not like they simply try, but on WHO's recommendation and other medical articles and being published in journals, they will kind of trial medicines on people who are more serious. But for me, I had no symptoms, so basically not once. I didn't take any drugs.
How good for you.
Yeah, I was literally just there, like in the hospital. But my friend, she had, even though she felt fine, and I suppose when you look at her like, oh, she doesn't look sick or anything like that, she actually had the virus that actually kind of like started affecting her lungs a little bit. She's fine now. She was on 𝗬𝗓. So
I
yeah.
see.
Yeah.
Well, it's nice to hear that you recovered by yourself.
I know. Vitamin C,
Good for you.
vitamin C
And
tablet.
and also someone asked like, do you think you will still choose to travel back home if you can go back in time?
See, that's a good question.
Tough one.
Yeah. I suppose my answer will be that yes, because I suppose knowing how I reacted to it is going to be a bias to my answer, because I know now that I didn't suffer
It's nothing
physically
like
and emotionally, I suppose, as bad as someone who would really feel, oh, they can't breathe, you know, the typical symptoms like they can't breathe, sore throat, fever, like everything. If I had gone through that, possibly my answer would be different. But because I didn't, I think I would have still chosen to come back based on a few reasons. I think A, if I were to get it, I would rather get it here than in the UK, personally. B, I think I'm personally quite extroverted. So not having anyone to speak to for 3 weeks was honestly really difficult for me. It's really just not the same to speak to people virtually. And I think maybe if you're still abroad, abroad and alone, you could probably appreciate that. And I think the reality is when you're alone, I guess the risk is always a lot higher in a way, because you do have to do everything by yourself.
Yeah.
When I was grocery shopping and stuff, I was like that one person, like wearing gloves, like all the way up to my freaking shoulders. And like, I will not re-wear clothes that I wore outside. I'm like sanitize my whole room when I come home, like shower and like sanitize my groceries, and like I still got it. So it kind of depends. Like, okay, look at the UK now. You know, people just don't seem to take it very seriously. So at least, you know, when you're back home, I guess the culture of Asians generally tends to be very different. I think Asians tend to be a little bit more communal, and like we have a bit more of a group mentality. You know, I protect you because I protect the group. We think of ourselves more like collectively. Whereas I think in Western countries, they tend to think of themselves a bit more individualistically. And, you know, sometimes that's fine. You know, they are their own person. And really
it's just cultural differences.
It's a cultural difference. So I think just, this is not a usual situation. It is literally a pandemic. I would prefer to be in a situation where at least I think generally everyone does want to protect everyone, rather than I got my rights to not wear a mask. So I'm not going.
Well, last question for you, Chrislyn.
Yes.
So for students who are planning to return home in Malaysia or flying again abroad, is there any advice or any tips that you would, want to give them?
Yeah. I think definitely my first tip would be not to be complacent about any standard operating procedure, even if it is not the culture of the country you are entering into. And I think this can be really difficult because humans are generally quite low compliance. So if you see everyone around you not wearing a mask, you're also like, do I really need to wear a mask? Do I need to be the only person here wearing a mask? And I think let's just face the reality that if you are an Asian person in a predominantly white racist country and you wear a mask, you're probably going to be harassed for it. And I think that is so horrible and so unnecessary, but I think that's no reason to not follow SOPs, because ultimately the best way to combat this is if everyone follows the SOP. You just need one person to not follow it. But again, if you're in a culture of people aren't following it, you still should follow it, because you don't want to contribute to any potential infections.
Impact, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I would suppose if you're traveling from Malaysia back abroad, because I know some people are starting uni again soon, I think it is definitely worth stocking up on things like masks. it's going to be a lot cheaper. This is a financial tip. It's going to be a lot cheaper here than it will be in the UK. Also, maybe you can sell it. I don't know, but
Hot tip.
definitely try and stock up on things like masks here, because I think in most parts of Asia, especially Malaysia, we're no longer at the height of our pandemic, so things are becoming more readily available. It's not like things are missing from the shelves anymore. So definitely try and stock up here if you can. And also another tip for actually both ways, if you're coming back to Malaysia and if you're going abroad. Malaysia, there's less of an issue because now they've reinstated the quarantine rules, so you can't escape. But if you're going abroad, I know it's hard, especially if no one's actually actively monitoring you, but try your best to actually quarantine for the 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Just for the same reasons as I mentioned earlier, you don't want to add any impact to what's already a bad situation.
Yeah, just do your part, like be responsible to yourself, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Chrislyn. Like what you shared today, really, really interesting. It was really interesting. Like it was a really tough one, but we're very glad that you went through it and you are well now. Very grateful that you are okay.
Yeah, I'm fine, honestly, guys. Like if you see me, I'm actually okay.
Yeah, and thanks for being that generous as well and very willingly to, share your whole experience.
Yeah, no problem.
Very thankful for that. Right, and thank you for joining us today. And thanks for everyone who's been tuning in to our session. Our next session will be on the 6th of August, so remember to tune in and we'll see you soon. Take care, everyone, and take care, Chrislyn.
Thank you.